The ballroom glittered with champagne and laughter. Crystal glasses clinked. Music floated through the air. Everyone was dressed to impress. Everyone, except her. She stood near the edge of the room, one hand resting on her pregnant belly, the other gripping her clutch like a lifeline. She didn't belong to this world of silk dresses and sharp smiles. That's why they noticed her. A woman in a designer gown glanced at her stomach and smirked. Is she even invited? Another laughed. Careful, she might stain the furniture. Then someone bumped into her on purpose. Hard. Her glass shattered. Red wine spilled down her dress. The room went quiet for half a second. Then the laughter came. She didn't scream, didn't argue. She just lowered her eyes, whispering softly, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble. That's when the doors at the back of the ballroom opened. Heavy footsteps. Sudden silence. Every head turned. Because the man who just walked in wasn't a guest. He was the last person in the city anyone should ever humiliate the wife of. Stay with me until the end? Because what happened in the next few seconds changed the lives of everyone in that room forever. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. Elena Rossetti never imagined her life would lead to this moment. Standing in the most exclusive ballroom in Manhattan, wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary, surrounded by the city's elite, she felt more out of place than ever before. 6 months pregnant and glowing despite her discomfort, Elena had tried to blend into the shadows. This charity gala was supposed to be simple. Show up, smile, let Vincent handle the business conversations, and go home to their quiet brownstone in Brooklyn. But Vincent had been called away 20 minutes ago for an urgent phone call. Something about a shipment delay at the docks. He'd kissed her forehead and promised to return quickly, leaving her alone in a sea of strangers who whispered behind diamond earrings and silk fans. The problem wasn't just that Elena felt uncomfortable. The problem was that these people could sense weakness like sharks smell blood in the water. And a pregnant woman standing alone at a party where everyone else moved in carefully choreographed social circles? She might as well have worn a target on her back. Margaret Whitmore had noticed her first. The real estate heiress with perfectly styled silver hair and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Margaret's family had owned half of Manhattan for 3 generations, and she treated anyone below her social station like an amusing inconvenience. Sarah, darling, look at that poor thing by the windows, Margaret whispered to her friend, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Someone should tell her this isn't a baby shower. Sarah Chen, wife of a prominent investment banker, giggled behind her champagne flute. Maybe she's here for the catering staff, though I suppose even they dress better than that. Elena heard every word. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she kept her eyes fixed on the city lights beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. She'd learned long ago that reacting only made things worse. Better to stay quiet, stay invisible, and wait for Vincent to return. But invisibility wasn't an option when you were the only visibly pregnant woman in a room full of people who'd paid $10,000 a plate to attend this gala. The whispers followed her like shadows, growing bolder as more guests noticed the target. Is that a Nordstrom dress? Someone snickered. How quaint. Look how she's holding her purse, like someone might steal it. I heard Vincent Rossetti married some nobody from Queens. Apparently this is her. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her clutch. The irony wasn't lost on her. These people had no idea who Vincent really was. To them, he was just another successful businessman with interests in import and export. They saw the expensive suits and generous donations to charity, but they missed the careful way men stepped aside when he walked through a room. They missed the deference in voices when people spoke his name. Vincent Rossetti wasn't just successful, he was untouchable. And anyone who truly understood the power structures of this city would never dream of disrespecting his wife. But Margaret Whitmore and her circle of socialites lived in a bubble of inherited wealth and manufactured importance. They measured power by country club memberships and charity board positions. They had no concept of the kind of influence Vincent wielded in the shadows. The wine incident happened so quickly that Elena barely had time to react. She'd been reaching for a small appetizer from a passing waiter when Margaret's friend Amanda deliberately stepped into her path. The collision looked accidental to anyone watching from a distance, but Elena felt the intentional force behind it. Her glass of red wine exploded against the marble floor in a shower of crystal and crimson. The expensive fabric of her navy blue dress, the one she'd chosen so carefully to look elegant and understated, was instantly ruined. Dark stains spread across her chest and down her skirt like spilled blood. The immediate silence that followed was deafening. Even the string quartet seemed to pause mid-note. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned toward the pregnant woman standing in a pool of broken glass and wine, her face burning with humiliation. Then the laughter started, not from everyone, but from enough people to make Elena's heart sink into her shoes. The sound echoed off the marble walls and crystal chandeliers, bouncing around the ballroom like a cruel symphony. "Oh my goodness!" Amanda gasped with fake concern, her hand flying to her chest in mock horror. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see you there." Margaret's laugh was particularly cutting. "Well, at least the stain matches her shoes." Elena stood frozen, one hand instinctively protective over her belly, where her unborn daughter seemed to respond to her mother's distress with urgent kicks. She felt utterly exposed, utterly helpless, surrounded by people who saw her pain as entertainment. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the continued murmurs and chuckles. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." The words came automatically, a reflex learned from years of trying to smooth over situations where she didn't belong. Even now, humiliated and dripping with wine, her first instinct was to apologize for existing in their space. What Elena didn't know was that her husband had finished his phone call 3 minutes ago. He'd been making his way back through the hotel's corridors, past oil paintings worth more than most people's houses and marble statues that belonged in museums. Vincent Rossetti was a man who commanded respect through presence rather than volume. At 42, he moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd never needed to raise his voice to be heard. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, and his brown eyes missed nothing. Those who worked for him knew that his calmest moments were often his most dangerous. He'd been thinking about Elena as he walked, wondering if she was managing okay among the socialites and politicians who populated these events. She was too kind for this world, too genuine for rooms full of people who measured worth by bank account balances and family names. That's why, when he pushed through the ballroom doors and saw his pregnant wife standing in a circle of broken glass while people laughed at her humiliation, something cold and terrible settled in his chest. The laughter died instantly. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The string quartet's music faltered and fell silent. Vincent Rossetti had arrived, and everyone in that room was about to learn exactly what happened when you made the mistake of hurting the people he loved. Vincent's footsteps echoed against marble like gunshots in a cathedral. Each step was measured, deliberate, the sound cutting through the silence with surgical precision. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. The crowd parted before him like water before the bow of a ship. Men who controlled billion-dollar corporations suddenly found the floor fascinating. Women who'd inherited their power through bloodlines that traced back centuries stepped aside without thinking, driven by an instinct older than their trust funds. Margaret Whitmore felt her breath catch in her throat. She'd seen Vincent Rossetti at these events before, had even exchanged pleasantries about the weather and the charity's cause, but she'd never seen him like this. The man walking toward them wasn't the polite businessman who wrote generous checks and made small talk about real estate markets. This was someone else entirely. Elena looked up and felt her knees nearly buckle with relief. Vincent's eyes found hers across the room, and for just a moment, his expression softened. The fury didn't disappear, But it shifted, contained itself, became something more dangerous than raw anger. He reached her in what felt like slow motion, though it couldn't have been more than 15 seconds. The entire ballroom watched as Vincent Rossetti removed his black dinner jacket, with movements so controlled they seemed choreographed. He draped it around Elena's shoulders, covering the wine stains, shielding her from the stares. "Are you hurt?" His voice was quiet, meant only for her, but in the absolute silence of the ballroom, every word carried. Elena shook her head, not trusting her voice. Vincent's hand found the small of her back, steadying her, and she felt some of the humiliation begin to dissolve. She wasn't alone anymore. She was protected. Vincent's gaze swept across the crowd, cataloging faces, memorizing details. His eyes lingered on the broken glass at Elena's feet, the wine stains on her dress, the guilty expressions of those who'd been laughing moments before. "Gentlemen," Vincent said, his voice carrying easily across the ballroom despite its conversational volume. "Ladies," he nodded politely, as if he'd just arrived for cocktails rather than walking into the aftermath of his wife's humiliation. Margaret Whitmore cleared her throat, attempting to regain some semblance of social control. "Vincent, how lovely to see you. I'm afraid there's been a small accident." "Accident." Vincent repeated the word as if testing its flavor and finding it bitter. His eyes settled on Margaret, with the kind of attention that made her wish she could disappear into the marble floor. Amanda, the woman who'd caused the collision, tried to step backward into the crowd, but found her path blocked by other guests who suddenly didn't want to be associated with her. "It was just a bump," she said weakly. "These things happen at parties." Vincent's smile was winter itself. "These things happen." He looked down at the broken crystal scattered around his wife's feet, each shard catching the light from the chandeliers like fallen stars. "My wife was standing here, carrying my unborn child, and someone decided to make her the evening's entertainment." The way he said it made several people visibly flinch. There was no accusation in his tone, no anger, just a simple statement of fact. Somehow that was infinitely more terrifying than shouting would have been. "Now, I'm curious," Vincent continued, his hand still protectively placed on Elena's back. "Who wants to explain to me how a pregnant woman ends up covered in wine while a room full of people laughs?" The silence stretched like a held breath. Even the hotel staff had stopped moving, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Margaret's confidence was evaporating rapidly, but she made one last attempt to control the narrative. "Vincent, surely you understand that these charity events can be quite crowded. Sometimes people bump into each other. It's really no one's fault." Vincent nodded thoughtfully, as if considering this explanation. "No one's fault," he mused. "That's interesting." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew his phone, a simple gesture that somehow made half the room tense with anticipation. "You know what else is interesting? The security footage." Several faces went pale. In an age where everything was recorded, where social media turned private moments into public spectacles, the idea of video evidence was terrifying. "This hotel has excellent security," Vincent continued conversationally. "Cameras in every corner, high definition, perfect audio. I imagine the footage of the last 10 minutes would be quite illuminating." Amanda's face had gone white as fresh snow. "I told you, it was an accident." "Was it?" Vincent asked with genuine curiosity. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like someone deliberately humiliated my wife while I was taking a business call. It looks like grown adults found entertainment in making a pregnant woman feel ashamed for existing in their space." The room was so quiet that Elena could hear her own heartbeat. Vincent's presence had transformed the entire atmosphere from one of cruel entertainment to something approaching a courtroom where judgment was about to be passed. "But perhaps I'm wrong," Vincent said with a slight shrug. "Perhaps this really was just an unfortunate accident between strangers who bear each other no ill will." Hope flickered in Margaret's eyes. Maybe this could still be smoothed over, explained away, forgotten. Vincent's next words extinguished that hope completely. "Of course, if it was an accident, then surely everyone here would want to make amends." Surely the people who laughed at my wife's pain would want to apologize for their reaction. Surely someone would want to ensure this kind of misunderstanding never happens again. His gaze moved slowly around the circle of guests, and Elena realized that her husband wasn't just angry. He was giving them a choice, a chance to do the right thing, to acknowledge what they'd done and make it right. But she could see in their faces that they didn't understand the gift they were being offered. They saw only a businessman making a scene at a charity gala. They had no idea they were standing at the edge of a cliff, and Vincent Rossetti was offering them a rope. Margaret straightened her shoulders, her breeding and arrogance overriding her instincts. "Vincent, I think you're overreacting. These things happen in polite society. Perhaps if your wife were more accustomed to events like this, she wouldn't be so easily upset." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Elena felt Vincent's hand tighten slightly against her back, the only sign of his reaction. When he spoke, his voice remained perfectly level, perfectly controlled. "More accustomed to events like this," he repeated softly. "I see." He looked around the ballroom, taking in the oil paintings and crystal chandeliers, the designer gowns and inherited jewelry. "You know what's fascinating about polite society? How quickly it forgets its manners when it thinks no one important is watching." Vincent pulled out his phone again, this time actually dialing a number. The sound of the call connecting was audible in the perfect silence. "Marcus," Vincent said into the phone, his voice carrying clearly across the ballroom. "I need you to pull the guest list for tonight's charity gala. Cross-reference it with our business interests. I want to know every connection, every contract, every favor owed." He paused, listening to the response on the other end. "Yes, all of them. And Marcus? Start with the Whitmore real estate portfolio." Margaret's face went from pale to ashen. Around the room, other guests began to understand that this wasn't just about a spilled glass of wine anymore. Vincent ended the call and slipped his phone back into his pocket with the same casual precision he used for everything else. The gesture was simple, unremarkable, but it sent ripples of unease through the crowd, like a stone dropped into still water. Margaret Whitmore's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. The Whitmore real estate empire had tentacles reaching into every corner of Manhattan's luxury market. Shipping contracts, construction permits, zoning approvals, insurance policies, all of it connected to a web of business relationships that could be severed with a few strategic phone calls. "So, Vincent," she said, her voice cracking slightly, "surely we can discuss this like civilized people." "Civilized," Vincent repeated, the word hanging in the air like smoke. "That's an interesting choice of words from someone who just watched a room full of people mock my pregnant wife." Elena felt the baby kick against her ribs, as if responding to the tension surrounding them. Vincent's jacket was warm around her shoulders, carrying the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with something else, something dangerous that she'd only caught glimpses of in their 5 years of marriage. She'd always known her husband was more than he appeared. The late-night phone calls, the way certain people's demeanor shifted when they spoke to him, the deference he commanded without ever raising his voice. But she'd never seen him like this. This wasn't the gentle man who brought her tea when she couldn't sleep or rubbed her feet when the pregnancy made them swell. This was Vincent Rossetti in his element, and it was terrifying. "Please," Amanda whispered, her earlier cruelty replaced by naked fear. "I didn't know who she was. I didn't mean any harm." "You didn't mean any harm," Vincent said thoughtfully, "but you caused harm anyway. That's the thing about actions. Intent matters less than consequences." He gestured toward Elena without taking his eyes off the crowd. "My wife is 6 months pregnant with our first child. She came here tonight because I asked her to accompany me to support a charity that helps underprivileged children. She wore her best dress, did her hair, put on makeup despite feeling tired, because she wanted to make me proud." His voice remained conversational, but something in it made several people step backward. Instead of an evening supporting a good cause, she got to experience what passes for entertainment among Manhattan's elite. Dr. Patricia Holbrook, A prominent surgeon who'd been watching from the edge of the circle cleared her throat nervously. Vincent, perhaps we're all overreacting. These charity galas can be stressful environments. Maybe we should just move on and enjoy the rest of the evening. Vincent's attention shifted to her with laser focus. Dr. Holbrook, you performed surgery at Mount Sinai, correct? Excellent reputation. I believe my foundation donated $2 million last year for your new cardiac wing. The blood drained from Patricia's face as she realized the implications. Yes, we're very grateful for your generosity. Generosity, Vincent mused. It's amazing how quickly generosity can turn into business decisions, how quickly donations become investments that require careful evaluation. Around the room, other guests were beginning to connect the dots. The Rossetti name wasn't just attached to import businesses and real estate ventures. Vincent's influence extended into hospitals, universities, art museums, and cultural institutions throughout the city. His foundation's money had fingers in dozens of the causes and organizations these people cared about. Elena watched her husband work and felt a mixture of awe and apprehension. She'd married a man who could destroy lives with a phone call, and she'd never fully understood that power until this moment. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, Vincent continued, his tone shifting slightly. I'm a reasonable man. I believe in second chances, in the possibility of redemption. So I'm going to offer everyone here an opportunity to demonstrate the civilized behavior Dr. Holbrook mentioned. The hope that flickered in several faces was almost painful to watch. My wife deserves an apology, Vincent said simply. Not because of who I am or what I might do, but because she's a human being who was treated cruelly while carrying our child. Anyone who participated in that cruelty, through action or laughter or simple indifference, has a chance to make it right. Margaret's pride warred with her survival instinct. The Whitmore name had opened doors in this city for over a century. The idea of publicly apologizing to someone she considered beneath her social station went against everything she'd been raised to believe about hierarchy and place. But the look in Vincent Rossetti's eyes suggested that pride might be a luxury she could no longer afford. I apologize, she said stiffly, the words seeming to physically pain her. The incident was unfortunate, and I regret any distress caused to your wife. Vincent tilted his head slightly, like a predator studying wounded prey. That's a start, he said. But I notice you're apologizing to me, not to her. Elena felt every eye in the room turn toward her. The attention was suffocating, but she could feel Vincent's steady presence beside her, anchoring her in the storm of humiliation and fear swirling around them. Margaret's jaw tightened, but she turned toward Elena with visible effort. I apologize for the incident tonight. It was inappropriate. What incident? Vincent asked softly. Margaret's face flushed red. The question forced her to acknowledge specifically what had happened, to name the cruelty instead of hiding behind euphemisms. For laughing when wine was spilled on you, Margaret said through gritted teeth. For the unkind comments. For making you feel unwelcome. Elena nodded slightly, accepting the apology even as she recognized how hollow it sounded. This wasn't remorse. It was damage control. But perhaps that was the best she could hope for from people like this. Amanda stepped forward next, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I deliberately bumped into you, and it was cruel and wrong. I don't know what came over me. Please forgive me. This apology felt different. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something that might have been genuine shame. Elena found herself feeling almost sorry for the woman, despite everything. I forgive you, Elena said quietly, speaking for the first time since Vincent had arrived. Her voice was steady, gracious even, and several people in the crowd looked surprised by her composure. Vincent's hand found hers and squeezed gently. Pride and love flickered in his eyes as he looked at his wife, not for her willingness to forgive, but for her strength in the face of their cruelty. One by one, others in the crowd stepped forward with their own apologies. Some seemed genuine, others calculated, but all of them understood that this was the price of continuing to exist in Vincent Rossetti's world. Dr. Holbrook apologized for her dismissive attitude. A prominent judge's wife apologized for her cruel laughter. Even some of the hotel staff who'd witnessed the incident without intervening stepped forward to express their regret. With each apology, the atmosphere in the ballroom shifted. The balance of power that had seemed so stable an hour ago had been completely overturned. People who'd felt safe in their inherited positions and accumulated wealth now understood how quickly that security could evaporate. But Vincent wasn't finished. When the last apology had been offered and accepted, he looked around the room with the expression of a teacher whose students had completed only the first part of a very difficult exam. "Apologies are a good start," he said. "But words are cheap. Actions demonstrate true character." He pulled out his phone again, and several people visibly flinched at the gesture that had become associated with consequences. The Children's Hospital Foundation was supposed to raise $5 million tonight, Vincent continued. "Between ticket sales and donations, you're currently at about $3 million. That leaves a gap that affects real children who need medical care." Elena began to understand where this was heading, and despite everything these people had put her through, she felt a flicker of sympathy for what was coming next. I'm going to make this very simple," Vincent said. "Everyone who participated in tonight's entertainment, either through action or laughter or willful blindness, is going to help close that gap. Consider it a practical demonstration of the remorse you've expressed." Margaret's face went white. "Vincent, you can't be serious." "I'm always serious about protecting my family," Vincent replied. "And I'm always serious about ensuring that children receive the medical care they need." He gestured toward the donation table that had been set up near the ballroom's entrance. "The evening isn't over. There's still time to make additional contributions. I suggest everyone take a few minutes to consider how much their actions tonight were worth." The crowd began to move, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency, as people realized that Vincent Rossetti wasn't making a suggestion. He was issuing an ultimatum. Elena watched in fascination as Manhattan's elite lined up to write checks and transfer funds, their earlier arrogance replaced by desperate calculation. How much was enough to satisfy Vincent's sense of justice? How much would it take to ensure their businesses and social positions remained intact? Within 20 minutes, the Children's Hospital Foundation had exceeded its fundraising goal by nearly $2 million. The irony wasn't lost on Elena. Her humiliation had generated more money for sick children than the entire evening's program had managed. But as the last check was written and the last electronic transfer completed, Elena realized that Vincent's lesson wasn't finished. The money was just the beginning. Vincent stepped back to the center of the room, Elena still at his side, and addressed the crowd one final time. His voice carried easily across the ballroom, reaching every corner where people stood in nervous clusters. "Tonight has been educational," he said. "You've learned something about consequences, about how quickly comfortable assumptions can be shattered, about the difference between inherited position and earned respect." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room like dust after an explosion. "But most importantly, you've learned that my wife, that any pregnant woman, that any human being deserves basic decency regardless of their social status or family connections. That cruelty has a price, and kindness has value." Vincent's gaze swept across the faces in front of him, memorizing each one. "I want you to remember this evening, not just because of what it cost you financially, but because of what it revealed about your character when you thought no one important was watching." The silence that followed was profound. These people who'd spent their lives navigating complex social hierarchies suddenly understood that they'd been playing a game whose rules they didn't fully comprehend. "Elena," Vincent said softly, turning to his wife, "are you ready to go home?" She nodded, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of the evening. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was fading, leaving her drained and desperate for the quiet safety of their brownstone. Vincent guided her toward the exit, his hand protective on her lower back. The crowd parted before them like water, everyone stepping aside to create a clear path to the doors. As they reached the ballroom entrance, Vincent paused and looked back one final time. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," he said pleasantly. "And remember, kindness costs nothing, but cruelty can cost everything. Everything." The doors closed behind them with a soft click that somehow felt final, like the ending of a chapter that could never be rewritten. Elena and Vincent stepped into the hotel's marble lobby, leaving behind a ballroom full of people who would spend the rest of their lives remembering this night. Outside, Vincent's driver waited beside a black sedan, the engine running quietly. The city lights reflected off the car's polished surface, and Elena could see their distorted reflection in the windows as they approached. She looked smaller somehow, wrapped in Vincent's jacket, but there was something different in her posture now, something stronger. As they settled into the leather seats, Elena finally spoke. "You didn't have to do that." Vincent turned to look at her, his expression softening for the first time all evening. "Yes, I did. They'll never forgive me for tonight, for what it cost them." "Good," Vincent said simply. Fear breeds respect faster than forgiveness ever could. The car pulled away from the hotel, and Elena watched the building shrink in the rear window. In a few hours, everyone inside would go back to their penthouses and estates, but they'd carry tonight with them forever. Some would learn from it. Others would simply be more careful about who they chose as targets. Vincent's phone buzzed with incoming messages, but he ignored them all. His attention was entirely focused on his wife, watching for signs of distress, making sure the evening's trauma hadn't affected her or the baby. "How do you feel?" he asked. Elena considered the question seriously. How did she feel? Exhausted, certainly, shaken by what had happened and what she'd witnessed. But underneath it all was something unexpected, a sense of justice served, of dignity restored. "Protected," she said finally. "For the first time in years, I feel completely protected." Vincent reached for her hand, careful of the small cut on her palm from the broken glass. "You've always been protected, Elena. You just didn't know it." The city passed by outside their windows, but Elena barely saw it. She was thinking about the woman she'd been an hour ago, apologizing for her own humiliation, accepting cruelty as the price of existing in spaces where she didn't belong. That woman felt like a stranger now. "Will there be consequences?" she asked. "For what you did tonight?" Vincent's smile was sharp as winter. "There are always consequences. The question is who pays them." His phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. Vincent glanced at the screen and his expression shifted slightly. Marcus found something interesting in Margaret Whitmore's business dealings. Apparently, she's been using charity funds to cover personal expenses. The IRS will be very interested in those records. Sometimes the greatest protection isn't the loudest voice or the strongest fist. Sometimes it's the quiet man who loves you enough to move mountains when someone dares to hurt you. Elena learned that night that she'd never been as alone as she thought. And Manhattan's elite learned that cruelty always comes with a price. What's your take on Vincent's response? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story reminded you why family matters most, hit that subscribe button for more powerful stories like this one.